There comes a moment in every woman's life when she gets tired of waiting on somebody else to see her, to fix her, to choose her, to validate her. And in that moment, when the mirror becomes more important than the crowd, when the soul starts crying out louder than the opinions, when the pain turns into power, that's when everything changes. Baby, that's the moment you stop looking around and start looking within. Because healing doesn't come from them. Breakthrough doesn't come from the applause. Peace doesn't come from the outside in. It comes when you finally say, I'm choosing me this time. When you focus on yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of sacredness. You start aligning with the version of you that God always saw, even when you couldn't see it yourself. So today's sermon is not about them. It's about you. About your wholeness, your healing, your next level. Because when you focus on yourself, everything changes. We live in a world that conditions us to rehearse the pain, replay the betrayal, and recycle the disappointment. It teaches us to analyze the offender, trace the trauma, and define ourselves by who hurt us instead of who we are becoming. But there comes a moment in your journey when you realize that freedom doesn't come from understanding them. It comes from healing. There's a version of you that's still stuck in the scene where it all went wrong. And as long as you keep going back there emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you will keep bleeding into moments that were supposed to be new beginnings. Healing doesn't start with their apology. It starts with your decision. Your decision to stop giving your pain the microphone and start listening to the whisper of purpose trying to pull you forward. When you stay fixated on who hurt you, your life becomes a mirror reflecting their actions instead of a window to your growth. And you can't grow when your roots are tangled in bitterness. You can't ascend when your spirit is anchored in offense. Because every time God tries to lift you, your heart reminds him of the heaviness you haven't released. You keep asking for elevation, but elevation requires emotional lightness. It requires a soul that's free from the weight of who did what and why they did it. You can't keep asking God to build your future while you're still obsessed with proving a point about your past. Healing is not about vindication. It's about liberation. It's about saying, I may never get the answers, but I will not let the questions rob me of my joy any longer. There is an addiction to over-explaining our trauma that must be broken. You don't have to keep laying your pain out like evidence, hoping someone will validate it. God already saw it. Heaven already documented it. The one who formed you knows every injustice, every betrayal, every heartbreak. But he also knows that what happened to you doesn't have to define what happens through you. You don't have to stay broken to prove that you were hurt. You don't have to wear your wounds like a resume. At some point, you get tired of the same stories and the same scars. You stop auditioning for empathy and start walking in healing. Because healing doesn't come from being seen as a victim. It comes from reclaiming your power as a vessel. There's a you underneath the pain, a you that laughs again, dreams again, believes again. But that version of you cannot be accessed while your eyes are locked on the one who dropped you. You've got to turn your gaze inward. Begin asking questions that don't sound like, why did they leave me? But why did I forget myself in the process of loving them? That's where transformation begins. Not in analyzing their dysfunction, but in understanding your own divine design. What part of you felt undeserving of more? What version of you settled because you didn't think better was possible? What story were you telling yourself about your worth that made you tolerate less than God's best? Focusing on yourself doesn't mean neglecting others. It means no longer abandoning yourself. It means waking up and remembering that you are worthy of your own love, your own attention, your own healing. You've been everybody else's anchor, everybody else's therapist, everybody else's cheerleader. But when was the last time you showed up for you with that same fire, that same loyalty, that same grace? You keep expecting people to pour into you when you haven't even opened your own well. Sis, your healing is not waiting on their return. It's waiting on your recognition. The moment you recognize that what they broke, God can rebuild. What they mishandled, God can restore. What they abandoned, God can breathe new life into. You can't keep renting space in your soul to memories that don't serve you. You've got to evict some thoughts, shut down some reruns, silence some narratives, not because they didn't happen, but because they no longer have authority. You've got to start narrating your life from the lens of healing instead of hurt. Speak from the scar, not the wound. Speak from the lesson, not the loss. Because the way you speak to yourself becomes the way you shape yourself. And if your inner dialogue is still rehearsing what they did, then your identity is still being held hostage by someone who's already moved on. Let this be the season you stop trying to make sense of the storm and start learning how to dance in the rain. The storm was never meant to define you. It was meant to develop you. It was meant to show you what needed healing, where you had leaks, where you were depending on people more than God, where you had unhealed patterns masquerading as personality. Your pain has always been trying to introduce you to the version of you that refuses to die in the wilderness. The version of you that says, I may not be where I want to be, but I'm not staying where I was. That version of you is waiting on you to stop pointing outward and start looking inward. And when you do, you will begin to see how much power has been buried under the debris of disappointment, how much vision was buried beneath the rubble of rejection, how much destiny was lying dormant because your energy was wrapped up in remembering who broke you. Who are you when nobody is looking? What dreams have you silenced? What passions have you postponed? What purpose have you delayed because your identity was still tied to who walked away? This is your moment to return to yourself, to stop shrinking into shame and start stretching into healing. You're not broken beyond repair. You're not too late. You're not too far gone. You just need to start tending to the parts of you you've neglected. You've been so busy surviving that you forgot how to thrive, but you can't thrive until you reclaim your power. And that starts with choosing yourself again, not out of ego, but out of obedience. Because God cannot bless who you pretend to be. He can only bless the healed, whole version of you that dares to rise. So it's time to shift, to stop explaining, to stop replaying, to stop handing your peace over to people who didn't know how to hold it in the first place. Stop giving sacred space to toxic memories. Stop rehearsing old battles like they're still your responsibility. You don't need closure from them. You need healing for you. And that healing starts the moment you look in the mirror and say, I choose you now. I choose your growth. I choose your peace. I choose your future. Because when you focus on yourself, when you tend to your own soul, everything around you begins to change, not because they changed, but because you did. There is something powerful that happens when a woman decides to stop waiting on outside validation and begins nurturing the quiet places of her soul. When you shift from constantly chasing the external to watering the internal, heaven takes notice. We often underestimate the sacred work of tending to what no one else sees, the pruning, the discipline, the spiritual detox. But God honors the hidden work. He multiplies what you cultivate in private, because while the world may be looking at your results, God is focused on your roots. Many of us are so hungry for the harvest that we forget the health of the soil. We want the fruit without the faithfulness, the platform, without the spotlight, without the surrender. But the truth is, your life is only as fruitful as what you're feeding yourself in secret. You can't expect public power when your private life is malnourished. You can't expect peace to flow from a place you never poured into. We try to reap blessings from a soil we never watered. We cry out to God for more, but God is saying, what are you doing with what I already gave you? The inner garden is where the real transformation happens. It's not glamorous. It's not always Instagram worthy. Sometimes it looks like silence when you want to scream. Sometimes it looks like walking away when you want to prove your point. Sometimes it looks like forgiving what still hurts. Sometimes it looks like trusting God when your heart is filled with doubt. That's what it means to tend to your soul. To create sacred space in your heart and to become your own inner champion, where God can plan identity, purpose, clarity, and healing. You don't need applause to grow. You don't need to be seen to bloom. You just need to stay rooted. God is not moved by noise. He's moved by nurture. He's not waiting on your performance. He's waiting on your obedience. Can you obey in the wilderness? Can you trust him in obscurity? Can you still plant even when you see no signs of growth? Because the harvest is a result of consistent cultivation. It's a reflection of faithfulness in the seasons where nobody was watching. And the deeper your roots go, the greater your capacity to sustain what God is preparing to release. But some of us want quick fruit without deep roots. We want microwave miracles, not planted promises. But fruit grown fast is fruit that rots quickly. You don't want premature exposure. You want divine preparation. Because what God is doing in you is bigger than a moment. It's about legacy. And legacy is not built on appearances. It's built on authenticity, on the daily decision to surrender your will to his, on the private choices that no one claps for, on the tears you cry in prayer when no one knows you're breaking. That inner garden needs constant attention. You've got to protect your peace. Set boundaries around your energy. Pull out the weeds of comparison, bitterness, jealousy, and fear. Because if you don't deal with what's growing in your heart, it will eventually choke out your purpose. Some of us keep wondering why our relationships fail, why doors don't open, why we feel stuck. But the truth is, our inner garden is overrun with weeds we refuse to face. God can't bless what you're pretending not to see. Healing takes maintenance. You don't just get whole and walk away. You've got to keep pulling, keep watering, keep surrendering, because your garden will always reflect your priorities. If your soul is dry, your dreams will feel dead. If your heart is cluttered, your vision will stay cloudy. You want to see fruit? Start with discipline. Start with devotion. Start with deciding that your peace is worth more than popularity. That your healing is more important than being heard. That your wholeness is more valuable than anyone else's validation. God is a gardener. He sows in patience and waters in love. He doesn't rush the process, and neither should you. Some seasons he's planting, some he's pruning, some he's protecting, but every season is sacred. Even the ones where it feels like nothing is happening, that silence is not punishment, it's preparation. He's building endurance. He's fortifying your roots. Because when the fruit comes, when the doors open, when the elevation arrives, you need to be strong enough to carry it. Don't despise your hidden season. That hidden season is where he's teaching you how to steward your soul, how to protect your peace, how to stay humble when you're hurt, how to find joy when the journey feels long. That hidden season is not a delay, it's development. It's not withholding fruit. He's increasing your capacity to bear it. And when God sees that your inner garden is ready, that your soil is rich with obedience, that your roots are grounded in his word, that your heart is clear of offense, that's when he breathes on your fruit. That's when the doors open. That's when favor finds you. Not because you shouted the loudest, but because you were faithful in silence. Not because you hustled harder, but because you stayed rooted deeper. Not because you pushed people out of the way, but because you let God carve a path no one else could block. Public fruit is a byproduct of private faithfulness. You don't need to advertise what God is doing in your life. He will make it obvious. He will make your growth undeniable. He will open doors that no one else can shut. He will place you in rooms your name never entered, because your heart stayed aligned when your circumstances were silent. That's the kind of blessing that can't be manufactured. That's the kind of growth that can't be manipulated. It's divine. It's appointed. It's yours. So take heart if you're in a quiet season, if you feel like nothing is moving, if it looks like everyone else is blooming while you're breaking. Remember, seeds break before they bloom. Darkness comes before growth. And God is still working beneath the surface. Keep tending, keep watering, keep believing, because when you tend to your inner garden, God won't just bless you privately. He'll grow your fruit publicly in front of every voice that doubted, every eye that overlooked, every person who thought you'd never rise. You don't need to chase the stage when you've already captured God's attention. He sees the midnight prayers. He sees the sacrifice. He sees the surrender. And in due season, when your roots are strong, your soil is pure, your heart is ready, he will make all things beautiful. He will grow fruit that testifies, fruit that speaks louder than any apology, fruit that confirms, the fruit that says this is what God can do when you take care of what no one else sees. The direction of your life begins to change. The moment you decide to shift your attention from what is broken to what is being built. Too many of us have been stuck, not because God isn't moving, but because we've been watching the wrong thing. We've been rehearsing the pain, replaying the betrayal, reanalyzing the failure, and as a result, we've been reinforcing the very chains we're praying to be free from. You cannot step into the next when your focus is chained to the past. The enemy doesn't always fight you with new attacks. Sometimes he keeps you in old cycles by distracting your focus. Attention is power. What you give your mind to, you give your energy to, and what you feed grows. Your entire internal atmosphere begins to shift, because the truth is, peace isn't always about what's happening around you. It's about what's happening within you. Sometimes God doesn't change the storm because he's trying to change your sight. He wants to know, can you see him in it? Can you see the lesson in the loss? Can you see the preparation in the pain? Can you see the growth in the grief? Because focus is faith in action. And when you focus on what God is doing, even in your brokenness, you create an atmosphere that invites miracles. There's a reason why Jesus often asked, what do you want me to do for you? It wasn't because he didn't know. It was because he wanted to know where your focus was. Are you focused on what you lack, or are you focused on the one who lacks nothing? Are you focused on the problem or the promise, on the pain or the provider? When you shift your attention to God's ability instead of your adversity, something shifts in the spirit realm. You align yourself with what heaven is saying instead of what your circumstances are screaming. But this kind of shift doesn't happen passively. You have to be intentional. You have to turn down the volume of negativity. You have to detox from distraction. You have to stop entertaining conversations that pull your spirit backward. You have to discipline your mind to meditate on what is true, noble, right, pure, and praiseworthy. Because if your mind stays in chaos, your soul will too. But when your focus is clear, your spirit becomes calm. You start walking in clarity. You start thinking with vision. You start moving with direction. And that's when God begins to move through you in ways that you couldn't see before, because your vision was clouded by everything you were trying to control. Sometimes we're so busy trying to fix everything outside of us that we forget the healing begins within. Your focus determines your faith, and your faith determines your flow. That's why the enemy sends distractions, not because they're always dangerous, but because they're effective. He doesn't need to destroy you if he can distract you. If he can keep your focus tied up in who left, who hurt you, who didn't support you, then you'll never see who God is sending, what God is doing, and where God is taking you. You've got to be bold enough to break your own pattern, to stop giving power to your past, to stop magnifying the things that made you cry and start magnifying the one who still carried you through. This is the moment where you reclaim your power by reclaiming your focus. Because when you change what you look at, you change what you believe, you change how you live. God is calling you to live above the noise, to see with kingdom eyes, to look not at what is seen, but what is unseen. Because the seen is temporary, but the unseen is eternal. There is breakthrough in your shift. Breakthrough doesn't always begin with a shout. Sometimes it begins with a shift in sight. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to talk to yourself differently. You begin to expect differently. You begin to worship in the middle of the war. You begin to thank God while it's still hard. And that changes the atmosphere. That shifts the temperature of your heart. That invites heaven into your space. When you focus on what God is doing, even if it's small, you multiply your gratitude. And gratitude is a magnet for grace. Suddenly, the very thing you thought would take you out becomes the place God uses to take you up. Suddenly, the pain becomes the platform. The struggle becomes the story. The wound becomes the well. But it only happens when your focus changes. You can't build the future if your eyes are locked on what fell apart. You got to fix your eyes on what's still possible, on what God is still able to do, on the doors that are still opening, on the calling that's still alive. Focus isn't about pretending things aren't hard. It's about choosing what deserves your attention in the midst of the hard. It's about deciding that your destiny deserves more attention than your discouragement, that your calling deserves more energy than your criticism, that your future deserves more focus than your failure. And once you make that decision, you begin to attract the next level. Not because everything around you changed, but because your internal atmosphere became fertile ground for God to move. Shift your attention and you shift your atmosphere. Shift your focus and you shift your future. Because when your eyes are on him, your spirit stands up, your heart expands, your mind clears, your faith ignites, and suddenly the door that looked locked starts to move. Not because you forced it, but because you focused. You aligned your heart with heaven. And when alignment comes, so does acceleration, so does favor, so does clarity, so does breakthrough. Because everything changes when you do. And everything in your world begins to respond when your attention returns to the one who is still writing your story. Healing is not just about feeling better. It's about breaking cycles. And when you finally decide to focus on yourself, it's not selfish, it's strategic. Because your healing doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone connected to you. There are things in your bloodline that may have started before you, but God has anointed you to be the one it ends with. And that kind of generational shift begins with a personal decision. I will not ignore my pain. I will not silence my trauma. I will not normalize dysfunction. I will not keep bleeding on people who didn't cut me. I will focus on my healing so I don't pass down what I was never meant to carry. Too many people have been carrying wounds that they never had the time or space to address. And because they never focused on themselves, they raised children out of survival. They led marriages out of trauma. They made decisions from a place of unhealed pain. But you are different. You are the curse breaker. You are the pattern interrupter. You are the one God chose to stop the repetition and start the restoration. That's why the enemy fights your focus. Because if you ever start taking care of yourself, you'll become dangerous to every cycle that tried to keep you bound. This isn't just about mental health. It's about spiritual freedom. The enemy wants to convince you that your healing can wait, that you've got too much to do, that you've got to take care of everyone else first. But God is saying your wholeness is a priority. Because when you are whole, you can love from a healthy place. You can lead with discernment. You can speak with authority. You can build with longevity. God isn't calling you to pour out while empty. He's calling you to overflow. But that overflow only comes when you stop ignoring what's broken and start investing in what needs repair. Focusing on yourself is not about turning inward with pride. It's about turning inward with honesty. It's about asking the hard questions. Why do I react this way? Why do I feel unsafe in peace? Why do I self-sabotage when things go well? Why do I fear being seen? These are not weaknesses. These are windows. And when you open them with God, He shows you the root behind the behavior. He reveals the trauma behind the temper. He exposes the fear behind the facade. And that exposure is not to shame you, it's to free you. Because freedom doesn't come from pretending you're okay. It comes from acknowledging where you're not and inviting God into it. Some of the most powerful prayers don't have perfect words. Sometimes they sound like, God, I don't know why I keep doing this, but I want to stop. That's the kind of transparency that heaven honors. That's the kind of humility that draws God close. Because when you bring Him the real you, He brings real healing. Not surface level healing. Not temporary relief, but deep, generational, foundational transformation that touches the roots and shifts the legacy. The truth is, your healing is going to bless people you haven't even met. Your obedience to focus on yourself today will be the reason someone else walks in freedom tomorrow. Your willingness to go to therapy, to set boundaries, to stop over functioning, to forgive, to rest, to pray, to journal, to worship, to sit in silence with God, that will echo through generations. Your children will be healthier. Your ministry will be clearer. Your vision will be sharper. Not because you knew everything, but because you made healing a priority. We live in a culture that celebrates hustle, but rarely honors healing. But heaven does. Heaven celebrates the moment you say, no more pretending, no more performing, no more pleasing at the cost of my peace. God can't bless who you pretend to be, but He will heal who you're honest enough to reveal. So let Him into your confusion. Let Him into your habits. Let Him into the memories you buried. Let Him into the anger you were told to suppress. Because God will never heal what you hide. But the moment you get real, the healing gets real too. And as you focus on yourself, you'll start to see the fruit. You'll notice the pause before you react. You'll feel peace where there used to be panic. You'll notice how you no longer need validation to feel worthy. You'll find joy in solitude. You'll protect your energy without guilt. You'll stop chasing people who aren't assigned to your future. That's not pride. That's growth. That's healing in motion. That's purpose unfolding. So yes, it may be uncomfortable at first. Yes, it may feel unfamiliar. Yes, it may require hard conversations and uncomfortable boundaries, but it will also bring alignment. It will unlock clarity. It will restore joy. Because when you focus on yourself, you become who God always intended you to be before life tried to break you. And that version of you, that's the one the enemy never wanted to see rise, because that version doesn't repeat cycles. That version builds new ones. That version speaks life. That version breaks chains. That version changes the family narrative forever. You don't need to wait for the right time to heal. You don't need to wait for permission. You don't need to explain your process to people who benefited from your brokenness. Focus on you. Focus on God's voice within you. Focus on the work He's doing in you, because the future depends on it. And heaven is ready to back you the moment you decide, I choose to heal. I choose to grow. I choose to focus on the only person I can change, me. There comes a moment in every journey where the distractions around you get so loud that you forget there's something powerful within you. You get pulled into the noise of opinions, the pressure of expectations, the weight of comparison. And slowly you start dimming your own light to fit into someone else's mold. But when you choose to focus on yourself, really focus, you start peeling back the layers of performance and uncovering the truth of who God created you to be, not who they told you to be, not who life shaped you into out of survival, but who you were before the pain, before the pressure, before the pretending. It's a divine rediscovery, a homecoming to your authentic self. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intention. It happens when you stop trying to be everything to everyone and finally ask yourself, who am I to me? Who am I to God? That's what you were never meant to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You were never meant to keep giving from an empty place, to keep saying yes when your soul is crying out for a no, to keep bending so far you forget how to stand. Focusing on yourself is the sacred act of returning to your center. And at the center of who you are is something holy, something fierce, something anointed, something that hell fears and heaven backs. And as you focus, you begin to uncover gifts that were buried under trauma. You find courage that was silenced by shame. You rediscover dreams that you thought were dead. You realize you were never too much. You were just in rooms too small. You find that your voice still works, that your intuition still speaks, that your heart, though bruised, still beats with vision. Because when God formed